Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs and welcome to another edition of Government Matters. You're well aware we've got an election coming up, and locally we have an election for Congress. And with me today is the person who is running against Congressman Neal, independent Nadia Milleron. Did I get that one right?
You did.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming in. I know I've been very curious about your background. I've been very curious about some of your positions. I've also been curious about why you want to run at this particular time, because timing in politics oftentimes is super important. So let's get all of the sort of basic stupid reporter questions out of the way, because I'm just a basic stupid reporter. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and also why did you choose this particular election cycle to jump in?
So I was an apolitical person. I am a lawyer and a farmer. I have a farm in Sheffield, Massachusetts. We supply the biggest dairy farm in Massachusetts with feed. So we produce hay and corn, field corn. And I homeschooled my children, and I did some kind of volunteer work as an attorney. But I didn't think that, I thought that the political system was kind of rotten and that money corrupted people, and I didn't want to become part of it. So I had been encouraged, as I have some leadership abilities, I'd been encouraged by my family to consider political office, different kinds of political office, and I always said no, because I just didn't want to become involved in a dirty kind of system. However, my daughter died because of political corruption. So she was a bright, shining star of a person working on global health issues, and she boarded a MAX plane, a Boeing MAX plane that was new. It was a 2-month-old plane, and she was transferring planes. She went from Washington, D.C. to Ethiopia for her job, and just stopping in Ethiopia to transfer planes, and then got on a MAX plane to go to Nairobi. And she texted us on March 10th, 2019, and she said, okay, I have 2 more hours to go to Nairobi. And I was relieved as a mom. I thought, okay, she's not in Nairobi traffic yet. That's where it's more dangerous with cars. Planes are safe, and so she's going to be all set. And then for other reasons, I had to go downstairs. I had to clean up a mess. It was the middle of the night, and I turned on the radio as I was working, and there comes the BBC, and it says that this plane in Ethiopia leaving at 8:36 in the morning and going to Nairobi has just crashed 6 minutes and 40 seconds after takeoff. And I just physically started shaking in the laundry room, because I knew that you can't have 2 planes from the same airline going to the same destination and leaving at the same time. And I also knew that my daughter had boarded the plane. So I went through this process of trying to figure out, oh, this is the second crash. We went to Ethiopia. There were no survivors. I didn't want to become involved still. So my uncle is Ralph Nader, my mother's brother, and he told me, you have to stand up as a victim's family. You have to stand up for aviation safety. And I said, I don't need to, because Boeing is not going to want a 3rd crash, and neither is the FAA. So I don't need to expose myself, my grieving self, and contact the press and get involved with government. I need to just stay home right now. And he showed me that the FAA had changed the comment period to get the plane back into service from 30 days to 15 days. So it was on a fast track to get the plane back in service without fixing it. So I couldn't believe it, but I had to believe it. That was the reality that he was showing me. So I didn't actually think that we could make a difference as family members. I just felt that for my conscience, like if there was a 3rd crash, how could I live with myself if I stayed home and did nothing and didn't stand up? So we went to Washington, and our family went to the NTSB and had meetings. We went to the Department of Transportation, the FAA. We went to eventually over 300 offices on Capitol Hill. And some of those meetings were eventually during COVID, and they were online. But we went to all those offices trying to stand up and trying to say, okay, this is our experience. It could happen to you. It could happen to anybody. We need to fix aviation safety. And we participated in a bill called the American Aviation Safety Act, which was eventually passed, to my great surprise, in December of 2020. So I asked for help at the time from my congressman. My uncle had to call Richard Neal and say, you know, Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, all these other legislators have reached out to this family. You need to reach out also. So he agreed to have a meeting, I think it was in June of 2019, but he didn't affirmatively actually help us. Like, we even reached out to his office. I was on Capitol Hill. There were hearings going on in the Senate. There were a lot of Crash family members. Boeing wanted to meet with the Crash family members. The Crash family members didn't want to go in the Boeing building, right, where they were offering to meet. So I had to find a neutral place on Capitol Hill, reached out to my congressman's office. The answer was, we're writing a speech for our boss right now. We're really busy. This is an international event that's going on with like Crash family members from all over, from Europe, from China, from Africa, from Canada. I mean, and I was looking for a neutral place, and Boeing was right there. There was no way I could delay it. It was happening right there. And Capitol Hill is not my backyard, you know, and I couldn't get the kind of help that I got from other legislative offices, I didn't get from my own representative. So what I thought is, we need a better representative. So that was starting in my head. We need someone who's responsive. We need somebody who's ready to answer the 30,000 calls that are going to come into the office, not just write a perfunctory email. Thank you for contacting my office. I'm proud to be your representative. That just doesn't cut it. That's not what the job is. So I was starting to understand, although I had voted for Richard Neal many times, but I was starting to understand that in Washington, he is not taking care of business for his district. And then it turned out that he was unopposed this cycle. So he didn't have any Republican running against him. He didn't have any Democrat running against him in the primary. And as a person who was not served by the office and who now is very aware of the other ways that he doesn't serve our constituents, I couldn't let that happen. I'm not interested in being a career politician like he is. I'm interested in going in, straightening out the office, getting it to be responsive and, you know, attentive to the actual needs of the district, and then leaving and letting somebody else come in, because the founding fathers set it up for it to be 2 years. So you are supposed to be a lawyer or a farmer or whatever your vocation, your job is. Go to Washington, bring the issues of the district that you're experiencing in the district to Washington, get those addressed, and then come back home and resume your job. You know, ideally, we should have term limits. Ideally, we would have, you know, 4 years term in Congress and have 2 of those and have it be a term limit, because money corrupts. So Richard Neal has receives some of the highest dollars of corporate dollars of any member of Congress. It sort of vacillates which person is getting the most at any one time, but he is among the top recipients of corporate money. And then you see how this affects him. So, for example, in Lee, Massachusetts, there's sludge that's been dredged out of the Houstonic River. There's PCBs in the sludge. The PCBs are carcinogenic. 4 years ago, Richard Neal thought that that sludge should be sent for a processing in New York State, a particular processing center, and then stored safely. Now, 4 years later, he thinks it should be in a residential community, stored in a residential community right next to the Houstonic River that it came out of, and right next to a state park. What caused him to change his mind? Well, if you look, you see that General Electric has given him, contributed to his campaign, over $50,000 during that time period. So that saves them a lot of money, because then they don't have to pay millions of dollars to transport this sludge to the processing facility and have it stored. So it's a really good deal for them to pay different politicians certain amounts of money and then save themselves a ton, and have those politicians say, no, 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 we think it should be stored in this residential community. My son died of cancer, probably from environmental causes. So I am really sensitive to the fact that lots of people in our community and in the area that General Electric produced these PCBs have suffered from cancer, and many of them have died. So we cannot be risking our communities like this. Another example of pay for play for Richard Neal is he was the only member of the Massachusetts delegation, so there's 9 congresspeople from Massachusetts, to vote against transparency in pharmaceutical pricing. That was last December of 2023. Why? Well, he gets a lot of funding from the pharmaceutical industry. It's against his constituents' interests, because when you have transparency, then your insurance rates tend to go down. So it's directly against the interest of his constituents. There's no reason for him to vote that way. There's the other issue of WEP. The municipal employees who have pensions cannot collect Social Security that they have already paid into in their careers. So they might have worked for a non-municipal company and paid into Social Security. Then they don't get their Social Security. So 325 members of the House of Representatives have brought a petition to the floor of the House going around Richard Neal and the Ways and Means Committee to have H.R. 82, which is addressing this issue and allowing municipal employees to get the Social Security they previously paid into, but it also allows their survivors, in case they would die, to get those Social Security benefits. And that's the difference. Richard Neal says, I have a bill, I have a bill. It's very interesting to note that he doesn't have any co-sponsors to his bill. Now, H.R. 82, which really does address this and is a bipartisan bill, has over 375 co-sponsors. So it's going to pass. It's going to pass despite Richard Neal, but he has been a roadblock for this bill. And why should he be a roadblock for this? No, it doesn't make any sense. So he tells the district one thing, I'm going to solve this problem. He tells retired police officers in Springfield, I'm going to solve this problem. And then he actively doesn't solve it and blocks other people's efforts to solve it. He has ads now on YouTube. He has digital ads saying, I suffered in my life, which he did suffer. He lost his parents at a young age, and I relied on Social Security. So I would never do anything to undermine Social Security. That is a direct lie. John Larson, representative from Connecticut, tried to bring Social Security up to the standard of living of today. That, we cannot buy, with Social Security benefits, you cannot buy the food that you were able to buy 20 years ago. So he tried to bring it up. Richard Neal actively blocked him. Actively blocked that legislation. So I don't know what he says one thing in the ad, but he actually does a different thing. So I do not want to be a public person. I do not want to run for office, but I have the capability to do it. And I have passed legislation, and I understand how to do this job. And I have the energy and the focus to be able to do it. So I'm willing to serve because we have such a terrible representative, and we don't have any alternatives right now.
Well, I went to your website, and you have some interesting goals, and there's particularly interesting because one thing about this congressional district, it's sort of lopsided in terms of population density. You live in Sheffield, which I've never been to. I've been to Great Barrington, but I understand that Great Barrington is sort of like the gateway to Sheffield. Is that correct? Okay. So you live in a rural part of the state. We're sitting in Springfield, which is the 3rd largest city in the state. We go back and forth between us and Worcester. And one of the largest cities in New England. So a lot of the issues that come about through an urban perspective, as opposed to a rural perspective. And I was very interested in some of the things that you're talking about. Number one, returning manufacturing. This has been something that a lot of people have said, well, manufacturing is never coming back. However, we are seeing manufacturing coming back slowly but surely across the country. What would you do if you're in Congress to try to say to a manufacturer, Western Massachusetts has got a lot of skilled workers. We've got a lot of real estate that's a possibility to build something here. How would you do it as a member of Congress?
So I would support the tariffs, which give incentive for manufacturers to manufacture their products here. So that has been effective all over the world. Germany has used that. Korea has used that. We did use it at the beginning of our country. Hamilton was a proponent of tariffs, and they functioned well to increase and strengthen manufacturing in the United States. So I would use that as an incentive, but also talk to manufacturers about the security that our country needs to produce medical supplies here. And our district is really perfect for producing those. So right now, generic drugs are produced mostly in China and India.
Right.
They do not have the same controls over the quality that our system has. And so there's adulterated products in there that actually hurt people's livers. So people are trying to use these drugs in order to have relief from pain. So they're already sick. And then they get a hit to their liver because of the lack of oversight of the regulator in those countries. And our country has great regulations for labor, for environmental concerns, and for quality of the drugs. And also, we have this problem that we encountered in COVID, but it's coming back because we haven't done anything about it. So we're shorted on medical supplies here in our country. So we have to produce, for our own security, we have to produce those supplies here. Masks, generic drugs, and other hospital supplies. And our district is well suited to doing that. So I think if we change the financial calculation so it becomes more expensive for manufacturers to produce abroad, and where it's expensive for the world for them to produce abroad because they're producing more pollution, they're producing more labor issues, they're producing in a way more poverty. I mean, it's expensive for the whole world that they do this, but we have to make it come right down to the bottom line where they could actually do better by producing it here and produce a better quality. And we have to engage everybody on that. We have to engage the people who buy the products, hospitals and consumers, that they have to prefer to buy American products because ultimately it is our security, our health security, to be able to do that.
I just want to step back. The word tariff is getting a lot of play on the presidential stage. Donald Trump is making tariffs sound like it would be a tax that would be paid by a foreign country. And it's not. It's a tax that's paid by the people importing the goods into America that conceivably could be passed along. So you would want to use tariffs as a way to say to manufacturers, hey, avoid this by producing products here, hiring Americans to do products, because you can avoid an extra business cost by keeping that. I just want to make sure that's what you're talking about, and not the not the Trumpian spin that doesn't really have anything to do with the definition of a tariff.
So my husband runs the Coalition for a Prosperous America that works with whoever is the trade ambassador in our government. So he's been working with Catherine Tai, contacts her several times a week, and they have been working on these issues to financially motivate companies to produce the goods here instead of producing them abroad with all these external costs that we're talking about that they don't kind of pay for. They just kind of ruin the environment, ruin a labor situation, participate in adulterated and defective products. So motivate them to do it with better standards in our country and motivate them financially to do that. So actually, the two trade ambassadors, Catherine Tai and Robert Lighthizer, who is the trade ambassador for the Trump administration in the past, there's no daylight between what they want to do. Both of those persons want to do the exact same thing as far as motivating people to produce goods in the United States and increase the number of jobs here.
My next question was about manufacturing our own medicine, which you just spoke to. One of the things that you talk about in one of your TV commercials is about inflation and the cost of consumer goods.
I just want to go back for a second, though, because Richard Neal has voted for China to have most favored nation status and be part of the World Trade Organization. So by doing that, he helped cause China to manufacture tons of consumer goods, which we then buy. So he has pushed in the exact opposite direction. So I just want to say that I would not be giving China any kind of favored nation status or, participating in the WTO because it undermines this whole effort to reshore American manufacturing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So let's get back to the idea of you've got a commercial where people are staying in a grocery store and they're gobsmacked at the prices. What do you see government's role in trying to regulate the prices of consumer goods?
So exposing where prices are reflective purely of greed. So sometimes prices are reflective of a reality. So when we had supply chain issues, prices went up because there were real costs there and people couldn't deliver those products without. But then certain companies did not drop their prices after the supply chain issues were solved. So one thing that a representative can do is hold hearings, do investigation, and expose a reality where a company is simply gouging the consumer. So we do have laws and regulations to control that kind of behavior. So yeah, you can charge what you need to charge for your product, and the government shouldn't regulate that. But if you are trying to take advantage of the consumer in an obscene way, like the price of butter being $3 and now suddenly being $9. So nobody can buy butter except on sale, and people are looking for the sales. Why do those sales exist? They must actually be able to sell butter for less than $9, as they do it sometimes. And that's when everybody rushes to buy butter. So it's those kind of practices that really put a tremendous stress on a regular family, and for them to function. And when I was getting signatures to get on the ballot, I saw that kind of stress, that families are going into the grocery store and they are having to make choices. What can they buy cereal? Maybe they can't buy cereal. Maybe they have to come up with a different breakfast. You know, the eggs for a while were incredibly expensive. So when the government exposes these kind of practices, the natural response of the company is to, oh, yeah, okay, and then you sort of see their price come down. So it does have an effect.
We've seen within the last few months both Target and Walmart announcing price decreases. So there is this sense, especially that memorandum from a Kroger executive who admits in the memorandum that we just jacked these prices up artificially. It wasn't we were responding to the suppliers. It was we got our price and then we just pushed it up so we could make more money and our bottom line could be better. So it is reassuring that someone is looking at this, because obviously it has become a major issue in this election. Although again, I think it's being spun in a way that takes the heat off of corporate America, where the heat should be on corporate America.
We can also look at other countries. So, for example, in Massachusetts, many dairy farmers have gone out of business because we have no floor on the price of milk. The price of milk fluctuates so much that if it goes too low, you're going to have to go under. And then you can't, if the price of milk rises the next year, you can't just pull your farm back together. There's been an auction, you've had to sell all your stuff, you had to pay all your debts. You can't just pull the farm back together. So Canada having a floor on their milk price has preserved their dairy farms. And we need to do that for our own security, our own food security.
So I got to ask you a question about agriculture, because obviously it's your family's business. There's been a trend over the last, I would say, 20, 25 years in Massachusetts where we have seen more and more agriculture coming back on a small level, not like a big corporate farm, but on a small level, a family farm level. In Springfield, we have seen this real successful campaign to get farmers markets. So there's a direct market that is built between people living in a city and farmers that go direct. If you were elected to Congress, what would you try to do to strengthen agriculture in a state like Massachusetts? Because clearly, with climate change, we're going to have to face the fact that there are states that are producing a lot of our food now, and they may be having some trouble in the future, as we're already seeing in Florida and California. So agriculture in a state like Massachusetts becomes more important. What would you like to do to try to help that?
You strengthen the consumer demand. So it's a very interesting dynamic in Springfield where we have immigrants, well, people who are placed here because they're refugees from very difficult areas like Africa. And they're coming in, they're farmers, and they don't choose to be placed in Springfield in an urban area. They're placed in food deserts, but yet they have a lot of knowledge about how they can grow their own chickens, how they can grow food. They're basically farmers. And they also are not used to living in a food desert. They want that fresh food. They want that fresh meat. And so nurturing that leadership that can come from those Africans living in food deserts where people have lived for 30 years and they've gotten used to the situation, they're getting used to eating chips all the time or whatever, that's like a leadership that we can develop and nurture the desire for fresh food. And by nurturing that desire, like we produce more food, more human food in our district than any other district in Massachusetts. But we have more people on SNAP benefits than any other district in Massachusetts. We have more food insecurity here per capita. And so we just need to develop that connection, particularly the connection between Berkshire County, where we have a ton of food, and the rest and the urban areas.
I got to ask you too, as an independent, independents walk an interesting tightrope in Congress. We certainly see in the Senate Bernie Sanders walking that tightrope all the time, but he caucuses with the Democrats. In the House, if you were elected, who would you caucus with?
You don't have to choose to caucus with one party all the time. You can, it isn't like such a bright line. I would try to represent my constituents. My constituents are mostly Democratic, so probably depending on whether there's a majority in the House, a Democratic majority, probably I would end up caucusing with the Democrats. I can't say it definitively at the moment because I don't know what would be most advantageous for the district, but probably that would be most advantageous. So, so I think that I can use this leverage. So it's so close between Republicans and Democrats that each party would want me to support their issues, and I would say, well, only if you support the issues which matter for my district. So those issues are, we need more doctors here in our district. This is an issue which affects every single human being in our district. Rich, poor, citizen, not citizen, politically engaged or not. Everybody has to pay health insurance and they can't get an appointment with a doctor. Like the closest you could get is probably 4 months out. Other people have to wait 6 months, or I heard a man had to wait 18 months before he can get an appointment with his primary care physician. So in that case, you're paying your insurance, but you're practically not covered. Your health issues are not being attended to, and they're getting worse. So there's a bill in Congress, and the Ways and Means Committee, Richard Neal is on a ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee, and that's in charge of health care. So this bill is under his jurisdiction, and he has not signed on to it. It's a bipartisan bill. So it's to increase the number of medical doctors in our country. In 1997, Richard Neal voted to put a cap on residencies, which is under the Medicare system. So 20 years later, that was lifted, that cap on medical residencies, but we still have a shortage of doctors, and we're feeling it particularly here. And doctors are overwhelmed. Their practices are closed. If you bring your elderly parents into the district, they can't get a doctor. They can't become part of a practice. They're all closed. So we really have to do something about this. It's a top issue for all the human beings that live here. And Richard Neal is in charge of this topic, and he is absolutely not attending to it, not even participating in the opportunities that he has right now in Congress.
Well, Nadia, our time is pretty much up. I want to thank you very much for coming in. This has been a really solid conversation with you, and I hope you would consider running again if this time doesn't work around.
I'm definitely going to run
because with the way politics works in Massachusetts, a lot of times you need a campaign just to introduce yourself to the voters. But thank you.
I have a chance to win.
Okay.
Right now, and if I didn't win, I'd run again. But if I did win, I'd also run again.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
And folks, thanks very much for watching this edition of Government Matters on Focus Springfield.